Darlisa, you want to get things going? It's 4 o'clock.
Sure. Okay.
Get things going.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping here. Hopefully you've all had a chance to join the Google Plus community. We're going to be going there a lot and referring to that a lot. Also, in this webinar, we're going to ask for a lot of interaction and activity, and a lot of that will involve using your sound. So if I could ask you to try to remember to keep yourself muted when you're not participating, and then unmute yourself and participate when you're asked to do that. So that would be great. So to get us in a storytelling frame of mind, we wanted to start with an icebreaker that actually gets us telling stories. So what we'd like to have you do is tell your name and then tell a little story about your name. So my name is Darlisa. So you can imagine my name has always been odd. And when I was a kid, it was especially kind of a source of pain for me in a way. I would just anticipate, you know, like that first day of school, going into a new class and having, I knew that the teacher would mispronounce my name. I'd been called Darcelia, Darlessa, Darlene, Darjeeling even, over and over and over again, year after year. But so it was always very embarrassing for me. And there were even times when, a couple of times when I even tried to change my name. But of course, it never stuck. I could never change my name. And I finally had to realize that I will never blend in anyway. I'm tall and blonde and kind of weird and silly. And I just had to realize that I am Darlisa. That's just who I am, and I will always be. So I came to terms with my name, and that's the story about my name. Dave, would you like to continue and tell us a story about your name next?
Sure. Thanks, Darlisa. So my name, I've gone by the name Dave for a long time. And for any old timers out there, and maybe some of the others, you may have heard there's a album that came out by Cheech and Chong back in 1971. And on it, they had a routine there. A guy walked up to a door and knocked on the door, and the guy on the other side says, "Who's there?" And the guy knocking on the door says, "Dave." And the guy on the other side says, "Dave's not here." And he says, no, I'm Dave. And the guy says, "No, Dave's not here." Well, thanks to that story and that routine, for the last how many years, every time not every time, but a lot of times when I introduce my name, I'll go up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Dave." And I can almost typically see that they look at me and they go, "Dave's not here." So I've been living with that for a long time, even to the point of about 2 weeks ago, somebody said that to me. So I'm still hearing that. So that's my story.
That's great. Haley, did you want to tell a story about your name?
I don't have too much of a story. I think my mom was telling me when she was young, she was looking at a picture of a little girl, a painting of a little girl in a field of flowers, and said, "That looks like a Haley Jean." And so when she got pregnant, she was like, "I always liked Haley Jean."
Oh, that's great. I'm sorry. Did you want to continue? Did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. Awesome. Louisa, are you with us? Did you want to tell us a short story about how you got your name? Or?
Hi, everyone. Well, Greeks typically name their kids after their mothers and fathers, and because of disagreement between my mom and my dad, they just decided to choose a random name. So my name is not a Greek name.
Oh, that is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Joni, did you have a story you wanted to share about your name?
Sure. My formal name is Joanna, and I'm an adopted child, and Joanna is the name of the doctor's wife who delivered me. And so it's the person who also arranged for the adoption. So my parents, in honor of their family and their support of my parents' growing family, I'm named after the doctor's wife.
Wonderful. Bill, William, did you want to share a story about your name?
Well, sure. Bill is the preferred name here. And aside from the fact that Darlisa's last name and my last name actually come from the same source, historically. When I was named Bill, and my father was named Bill, and I had uncles named Bill, and everybody was named Bill. I think it was like probably the most common male first name in the United States. And I guess it's a sign of maybe of how old I am, but I now work in a school where it's extraordinarily rare to have a student named Bill, and no other adult in the building is named Bill. I am the only one. So I don't know what happened in such a short time, but there we go. That's my story.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. Tian, did you want to share a story about your name?
Sure, it's pretty quick. My father tells a lot of stories. It's hard to tell which ones are true and which ones are not true. But he was in Vietnam and he got a large piece of shrapnel in his knee. And the nurse who helped him, her name was Tian, and she was French Vietnamese. Her mother was Vietnamese and her father was French. He obviously liked her a lot, and that's the extent of what we know about this woman. She's not my mother, but I was named after her.
That's great.
Yeah.
Mark, did you have a story about your name?
Actually, I honestly don't have a story about my name, and because my brother's name is Eric, my sister's name is Julie. And sometimes I think it's, my name and Mark may have to do something biblical with, the book of Mark in the Bible or something like that. But I have no idea if that has any relevancy or not. So I don't know.
Well, that's a story. It doesn't have to be long and extravagant, right?
That's kind of boring, actually. So
No. Thank you for sharing. Mm-hmm. Linda, did you have a story about your name that you wanted to share?
Well, my mom named me after a very rich aunt in hopes of getting some money, but my aunt donated it all to the church, so no luck.
Darn it. Okay, did I miss anyone here?
You missed me. You missed Rebecca.
Oh, Rebecca, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Would you like to share a story about your name?
It's very interesting, actually. My story is very similar to Louisa's. My dad wanted to name me after my mom. My mom thought it'd be way too confusing, and they wouldn't let him leave the hospital without naming me. And so finally they were like, and just chose the name Rebecca out of thin air. So.
And the rest is history.
There you go.
Okay, so would we like to continue on with Ryan?
Hey everybody, my name's Ryan, and my name's actually kind of funny. Well, it's not that funny. It's kind of a normal name for a kid born in the 80s, which is kind of the sad part is I'm actually named after somebody else's child. My parents were set all throughout the pregnancy to name me John. So up until about 2 weeks before I was born, I was going to be John. And then one of their acquaintances had a child and named their child Ryan. My parents liked the name so much that they decided to name me Ryan. So I'm named after somebody else's kid that I've never met, and so that's me. It's kind of interesting.
Thank you all so much for participating in that activity.
Yeah, thank you. I loved hearing all your great stories.
Thank you.
I want to get us moving into talking a little bit more about stories. And one of the things for me is I came across a book throughout this program called Made to Stick. I'm sure some of you guys have actually read it before. It's by Chip and Dan Heath, two brothers. And they have a lot of cool stories within their book. And it actually starts off with a great story that I want to read to you guys fairly quickly. And so here we go. A friend of ours is a frequent business traveler. Let's call him Dave, not the Dave that we just met. Dave was recently in Atlantic City for an important meeting with clients. Afterward, he had some time to kill before his flight, so he went to a local bar for a drink. He just finished one drink when an attractive woman approached and asked if she could buy him another. He was surprised but flattered. Sure, he said. The woman walked to the bar and brought back 2 more drinks. One for her and one for him. He thanked her and took a sip, and that was the last thing he remembered. Rather, that was the last thing he remembered until he woke up. Disoriented, lying in a hotel bathtub, his body submerged in ice. He looked around frantically, trying to figure out where he was and how he got there. Then he spotted the note. Don't move, call 911. A cell phone rested on a small table beside the bathtub. He picked it up and called 911, his fingers numb and clumsy from the ice. The operator seemed oddly familiar with his situation. She said, "Sir, I want you to reach behind you, slowly and carefully. Is there a tube protruding from your lower back?" Anxious, he felt around behind him. Sure enough, there was a tube. The operator said, "Sir, don't panic, but one of your kidneys has been harvested. There's a ring of organ thieves operating in the city, and they got you. Paramedics are on their way. Don't move until they arrive." This is one of the great stories that you can find in this book, and it makes sense because one of their 6 methods for making ideas sticky happens to be stories. One of the quotes from the book that I found fascinating says, "This is the role that stories play, putting knowledge into a framework that is more lifelike, more true to our day-to-day existence." And they suggest that stories actually give context to abstract ideas. And today, we're going to hope that you see that as well, that you can use stories throughout your teaching, whatever setting you're teaching in, that you can see that you can use stories to make ideas and stories and concepts more concrete for your students. And so as we go through, again, we'll just introduce ourselves again. Again, my name is Ryan Schultz. I'm a middle school social studies and math teacher. I've been teaching for about 9 years, and I'm in the e-learning program at UC Denver.
I'm Darlisa Cahoon, and I'm a corporate instructional designer and e-learning developer, and I've been doing that for about 8.5, almost 9 years. And I used to work at the Port of Seattle, and I just have got a new job about 3 months ago, thanks to probably having half of a graduate degree completed.
So I'm David Sampson. I'm an educational technology specialist at Virginia Tech, and I work in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And I just took on this job about 6 months ago now, and I've been in the program, the Instructional Learning Technology program, for about 1.5 years now. So it paid off for me, again, kind of like Darlisa, where having those credits got me this new job, and I'm really excited about this new job. So with that, we're going to show you our advanced organizer. Well, sorry, we got some objectives to talk about. Ryan?
Yeah, we just wanted to let you guys know that hopefully by the end of our webinar, you guys will be able to demonstrate that storytelling has an effect on our learning memory. It actually enhances it. And we also want you guys to come away with some ideas that you could use in whatever learning practice you guys are in, whatever teaching situation you're in, that you can come up with some strategies to use storytelling.
Okay, now we'll go to the advanced organizer. And this is out on the community, so if you had a chance to look at it, it was out there, and we will bring it up in just a second here. And if you notice, there's a link called Webinar Resources on the community, and this is where you can find all the documents and information about our presentation, the webinar. So this is actually a concept map, and it gives you a sense of some of the things that we're going to be doing in this webinar. It's organized as some of the things that stories can do for you, and this is more of our absorb activities. So we're going to talk about some things like a big picture example, some scenarios, and game-based challenge learning, some story types and characteristics. And we've also got building a story as a shared experience. And we're going to be doing some more of that. You know, we got started with the icebreaker, kind of sharing our names, story about our names, but we're also going to do the urban legend that Ryan was mentioning here, and we're going to do some recall of it. So make sure I hope you all took notes and remember a lot about that. We're also going to do some round robin guided story creation, and we're going to create some stories for the corporate environment. Also coming up is the use of technology to share stories. And this is where we're going to actually use technology like Google Drive and some of the documents that are out on the Google community to share stories between us and to kind of do a collaborative activity. So, and finally, also, we're going to do sharing of information and about storytelling and some of the things that we've found. We've got a lot of articles out on the Google community, so we've already shared that with you, but we're also going to share some docs with you that are out there, and we're just going to provide you links and more information out in that community that you can use to find out more information about all these things. So with that, we are going to go back into our slides, and we're going to have an activity where we would like some of you to share a story about a memorable learning experience. And this can be something, a story about a class you took or a teacher you had, something about maybe a classmate, or something that really kind of sticks in your memory. And what we'd like to do is have you raise your hand if you have something that you'd like to share, and then you can unmute your mic and tell us the story. We're trying to keep it to a minute or two, so some kind of brief story, but something that really sticks with you as a memorable learning experience. Is there anybody who would like to share something, a story? If not, I'll get it started. And so I don't want to gross you out here or anything, but I have and I don't know why this sticks with me so much, but one of my early college professors, I'll tell you how early it was, he was using an overhead projector. And as he was using this overhead projector, he would not erase the slide that was on it. He was writing things on the slide so that we could keep track of things. But instead, he would lick a paper towel and wipe it off on the slide that we were viewing. And as you can guess, this was not a good thing, because everybody in the class was basically grossing out as this guy was doing it, and he never seemed to realize what he was doing. So this is a story that stuck with me, and it's probably stick with you now too. I don't know. So does anybody else have a story that they'd like to share?
I'll go if nobody else.
Joni? Well, Joni's got it.
Joni, want to? Wonderful.
There's a story I always tell, so I'm not going to tell that one. I'll tell a different one, because I think all of us probably have lots of memorable learning experiences. But this one, I was a freshman in university and was challenged with my courses. I found them not very engaging, and particularly one that should have been really exciting, which was on late 20th century literature, primarily the 1960s. And so it was like my bailiwick. I was super excited, but the professor was very dry. But one day he came in and stood in front of the class, and he told a story. And the story he told went something like this. He talked about being a young man in university, and he had been very traumatized by President Kennedy's assassination, as his whole generation had been. And so it wasn't unusual for people to make a pilgrimage, basically, to Dallas and to visit the location where he'd been shot. And he was one of those people. And he tells the story about going there and walking onto the grassy area where he knew to be the grassy knoll, and walking around and looking. Here's the corner that the car would have come around. There's the building. Here's where people would have been. And looked down at the ground, and the grass was worn away in this one spot. And he realized that it was the spot where many other people had done exactly what he had done, which was come to this spot and try to place themselves in that historical scene, and realizing that he had shared the experience with so many other people. And as he told this story, tears were running down his face. It was clearly one of his most memorable learning experiences, and that from that point on, he had my attention for the rest of the semester.
All right. Thank you, Joni. Anybody else? Tian?
Yes, at first I was like, I can't think of anything, but I have like a really big one that's lived with me for a long time. So when I was a freshman in college, so that was about 12 years ago, I had a professor for a literature course. She was from Mexico, and she was about 4'8". I mean, she was a very small woman. And the kind of seating was like an auditorium seating room. So she was down at the front, and there was maybe like 100 students in this big room. And I remember immediately, like, she would ask a question. So very early in the semester, she would ask a question, and she would wait for a response. And I don't just mean like, the obligatory couple of seconds. She would say, if you guys don't answer me, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to wait. And I remember like the first like 4 to 6 classes, she would do this, and we would all like look around at each other like, it's been 9 minutes. And finally someone would say, she would wait. I mean, for as long as it took until someone would answer. But after like those first like 4 to 6 classes, people were like, we would have answers ready because that silence would get so uncomfortable. But she had no problem with it. It didn't bother her in the least. So after a while, after a couple of classes, people were like clamoring to raise their hands and answer her. And I remember everyone was suddenly so engaged, and just the way she like sorry, that's my daughter yelling. The way she would like command presence with that silence was just amazing.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
That's amazing. So do we have maybe one more story? Anybody want to share enough time for one more story? Let's see.
I
don't
can
see any. Okay, Bill.
Yeah. My dad was a very good handyman, and I remember weekends he would have the kitchen table would get cleaned of everything on it, and he would bring out his toolbox, and he would have containers of springs and screws and nuts and bolts and things, and one of the most fun things that I could do on any given weekend was just hang out and watch him fix plumbing and carpentry and all sorts of things. And so I got to, sometimes it was just playing with the nuts and the bolts and playing with springs and things, so maybe it's no surprise that I ended up becoming a physics teacher. And I remember the first school I taught at, they had this amazing room that was full of stuff that had been getting collected for 40 years or so, of stuff to use in the physics classroom. And I found this massive box full of springs. And I was like, oh boy, a box full of springs. Look at them. They are every different size and shape. This is going to be great. And so I brought it to my classroom, a little bit afraid that maybe the students would be a little bored of this or just think, oh, this is stupid. But instead, they like dove in and they just played with the springs. I ended up having a whole class of nothing but them playing with the springs. And then I would start talking about the springs. I said, now, of course, you guys, I'm sure, have played with springs. And every one of the students looked at me and said, no, we've never played with springs. And it made me realize that I couldn't take that for granted. So now I make sure my students play with everything, and I just give them that opportunity to play, because I can't assume that they've had it.
Wow, thanks for sharing that, Bill. It's really good. So what we were trying to do here with everyone is that as we share these stories, it's the emotions behind the stories that really make us remember it, whether it's the tears from the guy that was down in Dallas, or the teacher, the professor who made you feel so uncomfortable that but then it worked. It was like this revelation that it really worked, or realizing that people hadn't even played with springs, or in my case, kind of being grossed out by this stuff. It's that emotion that really is shared in a story that makes things memorable. So with that, I think we're going to move on to our next activity, and Ryan's going to take over here. So thanks for everybody for sharing.
Yeah, thank you guys. Those were great stories. I just know that I remember I had really great teachers that were great orators, that they were always telling the great stories, and they were always really interesting, and we always wanted to hear what they had to say. But I didn't always have very many teachers that actually allowed the students to share their stories. And so, as a teacher, I wanted to give my students a chance to share their stories and help them connect their stories with other stories that happen in history. And so every year I have my favorite unit, and it's all about stories. And in each different part, we're always telling a story, or we're building a story. And it's a story about moving west. You guys can probably, most of you remember the Oregon Trail and things like that, or learning about the Donner Party, or things, crazy stories that happened when people moved out west. And so this is definitely my favorite unit to teach. My objectives are pretty story based. I have my students describing the journey, what it was like for a pioneer, and then making connections between their own stories of moving and what moving is like today to what it was like back then. And so we're doing a lot of connecting in these stories. And so I just want to show you guys kind of my unit plan and how I actually use stories in each kind of phase of my units. And so the first activity is actually a connect activity. I don't start off by telling, I start off by asking students to share their stories. I ask them things like, have you ever moved, and what was it like? And ask them an even bigger question of like, why did you move, and why do other people move? To get people to start telling their stories, get the students involved in thinking about what moving is like. And after that, then we actually get into learning about the stories of other people, so that they can start to build those connections between their stories and the stories of the past, and those pioneers and all those hardships that they went through. And so I start off with those things to get them ready for a big do activity, where they actually participate in a simulation. The students become pioneers. It's kind of like the old Oregon Trail game, only we do it in class. They budget, they set out on the trail with a wagon company, and they face challenges. They meet people with cholera. They buy goods along the trail. They go hunting. They experience snowstorms. And throughout this whole time, they're creating their own story as a pioneer. Throughout it, each day they have to come up with a journal entry where they tell their story and they relate the events, and they talk about their emotions that they felt, and they really build that character throughout the simulation. And as an evaluation, as an assessment for this, I do two main activities. I have them in some way or another summarize their story to really pick out those really emotional events. And one of the things that I'd love to do eventually when I have more time is actually have them create a digital story to do it, where they add in pictures and they work on it on the computer and things like that. But that's another time killer. So I really just have them summarize that in another journal entry or a letter home. And then the last activity is I actually have them write an essay. So I actually have them compare their stories. They learned about the stories of the past, and then they created their own, and they have their own stories. And so they're bringing all these stories together to do kind of a compare and contrast of how moving has changed. And that's probably a bigger question than knowing who did what back in the 1800s, but understanding the idea of moving and what the story is like in that sense. And so here you guys can see that, you know, there's lots of different ways to involve storytelling and stories within a unit. It doesn't just have to be you, the sage on the stage, or reading a book or reading a story. It can be just about anything where you get students involved in creating stories together. And it creates memories. I have a lot of students that come back and say, hey, are you still doing that unit on with the Oregon Trail? Did anybody die at this point or whatever? And they get really excited about talking about that. And so it's created a lot of memories. And so I really believe it's because it's built upon those stories. All right, so at this point, we kind of want to take a little second to just stop. Does anybody have any questions or comments or ideas at this point? And you can either put those in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll talk with you. But it's nice to take a little breather here just to see if anybody's got any questions for us at this time. It's like maybe one. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Linda.
All right, we'll wait another 2 elephants. We'll move on. We should just wait for Tian, like Tian's instructor did. Not 15 minutes.
Yes.
Not 15 minutes.
Yeah, we don't have time for that, darn it.
All right, we'll move on. And Darlise is going to help us build a story together.
Thank you so much. Okay, so one really fun kind of and easy to do teaching activity involving storytelling is to create a story together. This can be done with just about any student in any setting, and it's a great way to build vocabulary or use as an icebreaker or even as a team builder. So what we're going to do, this is how it would work. So the teacher facilitator can set the theme or any other kind of parameters and then assigns one person to begin the story. So to begin our story, I'll start our story with the first prompt. And then I'm going to call you guys out again. I hope you don't mind being put on the spot. But as we go through and the word changes on the screen, then I'll call on somebody else and you can continue the story using that word. So are you game? Okay. So shall we begin? Shall we go to the next slide and begin the story with the first word, and it is webinar. Once upon a time, I had an assignment for a graduate class that I was in where I had to create a webinar. Oh my gosh, I didn't know where to start. How do you create a webinar? So I got together with a couple of my friends, Ryan and David. And Bill, would you like to continue the story with the next word? Oh, and don't forget to unmute your microphone, please.
Well, because I had absolutely no idea what a webinar was even, I mean, I vaguely understood, but I'd never seen one. I ended up joining a webinar, just a random webinar I picked out, and it was atrocious. It was terrible. It was a horrible experience, and I thought, I would like to have a much better experience if I'm going to be having anything to do with webinars. And I thought, you know, I think the key to this is getting participation on the part of the participants, and actually having some kind of interaction between the host and the participants.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So there.
Mark,
Does that work?
Mark, would you like to continue with confounded? And don't forget to unmute your mute button. Sorry.
But I was confounded, specifically by what possibly Bill had said earlier, but I went forth and found as much as I could on the issue of the webinar, and went online and went on YouTube and Googled the heck out of webinar to find out every piece of information I could find out about webinar, and I was no longer confounded.
Joni, would you like to continue?
So after I felt no longer confounded, I knew that I would be a brilliant deliverer of webinars, and that because of my brilliance, that the king of the realm would give me a treasure chest that had been locked for years, and that now I just had to figure out how to go on a quest, a webinar quest, to figure out how to get this locked treasure trove opened again.
Awesome. Rebecca, would you like to continue and unmute your microphone?
So I began my quest to unlock the treasure trove. And my first step was to go to another kingdom and deliver a webinar to them. I didn't go physically, I went over the internet. And at the end of it, they gave me a code that would open up another treasure trove.
Wonderful. Tian, would you like to unmute your microphone and continue?
Hey, let's see here. It's a good thing that I live with a web developer who's such a computer geek, because when I encountered any problems with my computer geek husband was able to help me. That's all I got.
Linda, would you like to unmute and continue the story?
It was great to go on Pinterest and other websites to connect with other webinar hosts and see all of their webinars for experience.
Great. Louisa, would you like to unmute and continue the story? I'm not seeing her video, so. Oh,
Okay. I'm here. Can you please pass to somebody else?
Oh, sure. Haley, would you be willing to unmute and continue? And Louisa, would you please mute your microphone again?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I explored all of the information that was presented on the computer, on the internet, avoided trolls along the way so that I could develop my own.
Okay. And we're back to Ryan. Would you like to continue?
All right. Whoops. Change my word. I realized that the limitations of the webinar world here on Earth was super limiting. So I decided to take a rocket ship to see if anybody on any other planets had any other ideas about webinars.
David, would you like to continue? Dave?
Sure. So having arrived on one of these other planets, I looked around and found that there were people who seemed to know how to do webinars. And so I asked them, please tell me, how do I do a good webinar? And what they said was, here, we will share our data.
And so they gave me a picture, a mysterious picture that I could not quite comprehend what it was of. Then I had to go back on the computer and try to figure out what that picture was to unlock the secrets of the data. Bill, would you like to continue?
Well, I was cruising on the internet trying to understand more about this, and I stumbled across a blog by someone named Darlisa Cahoon, and I said, hey, there's an interesting last name. And I read about the exploits of going to another planet where they apparently knew how to do webinars, and then coming back with data that had been cleverly concealed as a story. And in this blog, I was able to find out a great deal more about a good way to do this. And so I was very happy.
Wonderful. Oh, yeah. That's probably about all we have time for. Thank you so much, everybody, for being such good sports. And we will continue on to the next activity or the next section with Ryan.
Actually, I think it's mine, so I'll go
sorry,
ahead.
Dave.
No problem. Thanks, everybody. But that was as you can see, it's a very creative activity to get people to build stories like that. And sometimes it's like, I don't know what to say. And the other times it's like it just kind of flows out. So what we want to talk about a little bit now is some of the story types and characteristics. So there's some debates about how many types of plots there are out there. I've seen information that there are only 3 types of plots. Some people say 7, some people say 20, some people say more than that. But I'm going to go off a book by Christopher Booker, who talked about the 7 story types. And the first one he talked about was overcoming the monster. And this is the classic David and Goliath or Beowulf type story. The next one that's a very common type of plot is the rebirth. And a good example here is It's a Wonderful Life, where he basically gets a second chance at his life, and it's a rebirth. And of course, one of the most common that we're probably a lot of people are familiar with is the quest type story. And this is, of course, Lord of the Rings and that kind of quest story. Also, there's the journey and return, where somebody goes on a journey, they typically find something and then they return. Wizard of Oz is a good example of this. Also, Where the Wild Things Are, a great example, favorite of mine. Also, then there's also the rags to riches type of story, according to Booker. And this would be like your Cinderella type of story. And then, of course, the tragedies, like Shakespeare's tragedies. And then finally, the comedy plot. So William Archer was a British playwright back in the 1800s and early 1900s. And he talked about that drama is anticipation mingled with uncertainty. And so what he was really talking about there was the idea that the story kind of makes you anticipate what's going to happen, that there's some kind of anticipation about something that's going to happen, but that there's an uncertainty about how it's going to get resolved or what's going to actually happen. And that's what makes good drama. So that's an important characteristic of stories. So the 5 essential elements of stories, and you've probably heard some of these. One, of course, is characters. You always need good characters. That's what people relate to typically, is a good character, like a Harry Potter character, something like that people can relate to. And of course, the setting is very important. You want to get a setting that people are familiar with, or it can be a setting, some kind of fantasy setting that they're interested in. And that's a very important component too. And then, of course, the plot, the plot that we just talked about, those are important. And then there's some type of conflict in that plot where there's going to be a resolution to that conflict, and that's part of where the theme comes out. So Andrew Stanton is a great storyteller, and if you get a chance on the Google community, we've actually got a TED Talk by Andrew Stanton. And he was the screenwriter for Toy Story, Finding Nemo, WALL-E, and some other really great films. And his most important piece of advice or comment about stories is that the best stories infuse wonder. And these are the stories that really leave you a sense of either you've been transported somewhere or something has happened that has happened to you or to others that you can relate to, and just really leave you with a sense of that wonder. And finally, there's the narrative arc. So the arc is the exposition, which is basically the introduction of the story and introduction of the characters and the setting and all that. And then there's the rising action, which is a series of events that are complicating matters for the protagonist or for creating a sense of suspension or tension in the story. And then you have the climax, which is a point of the greatest tension in the story, and it's a turning point in the story, and it's leading towards that resolution. And then next you come up with, towards the end of it, the falling action, which is after the climax, and it's kind of the unfolding of the events after the climax, and it's the release of that tension towards the resolution, which then at the end of the story is finally the resolution, which is basically the end of the story. And that's where the problems get resolved, the conflicts get resolved, and the problems for the protagonist are finally resolved. So with that, again, we're going to open it up to any questions or comments. And once again, if you want to raise your hand or if you want to put them into the chat area, we'll take just a couple of moments here to see if anybody's got any questions or comments or ideas. We'll take ideas too.
Hi, Bill Calhoun here.
Yeah, Bill.
Who was it who said that there are only 2 stories? And what was one of them was A Stranger Comes to Town. That was one, and the other one was I Embarked on a Journey. And I think somebody famous said that, and I can't remember. I don't know if anybody can remember that, but I just wanted to throw that out there. It just popped in my head.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I'm not sure who said that.
I just Googled it, and it was Dostoevsky who said
There you
that.
go. There you go. And he would know. Thanks, Bill. Any other questions or comments? Or
It looks like we have some conflict. It looks like
yeah,
it says it was Tolstoy.
that's right.
I wouldn't want to get those two in an argument of who it was.
There you go, Rebecca. A Russian writer said it.
Somebody did.
Somebody said it.
Good.
Great. All right. Okay. Well, we're going to move on to the next with Ryan. Or no, this is Darlisa's going to take on.
Yes. Thank you so much, David. And, you know, I just Googled, so I picked the first one I got. So it could have been Tolstoy. I think the jury's still out on that one. Anyway, so using those same sorts of patterns and theories about stories, we could apply those not only to an academic setting, but also fantastically in a corporate setting. Telling stories in a corporate setting allows us to build context and put meaning behind policies and boring procedures and make things come to life for people. So next, what I wanted to do is do a short activity about creating policy stories. Every policy has a story behind it, and thinking about brainstorming and beginning to create stories around policies. So what we're going to do is we've got a Google Doc that we want you guys to participate in. We're going to pull that up, and it's on our community. So we're going to pull it up from our community, and you can also refer to it later if you'd like. And we'll also put it in the chat box, the link to that document. Oh, great. Thank you, David. He put that in the chat box. So if I could have you guys just pick a story, grab a line, and you can, pick a policy, rather, grab a line below it, and start to brainstorm ideas or tell a complete story about it if you feel comfortable with that. And we can use those same things, those same aspects that David talked about: character, plot, theme, setting, conflict, and start to build stories. And I'll give you a few minutes to participate here if you'd like, and then we'll talk about them.
I already like how I see some of these stories starting. It was a dark, confusing night. Like a good one.
I know, I like that too.
Or I see a classic starter. A man walks into a bar. Or once there was a man
who loved to listen to nature. Oh, that sounds like a great story. Boy, you guys are rocking it. And I love the detail, like the Starbucks story, to put all the detail in the story really like builds the credibility of the story too, and makes it memorable. That's how we create those sticky ideas.
Yeah, these are some great stories.
These are great, and it's really, I know it's asking a lot to ask you to just write a story on the fly. It's kind of it's a little difficult in a short activity, but you guys are doing amazingly. So I'll give you one more minute and then see if anybody wants to share their story. Talk about how they...
Well, we're definitely going to have to save these and share them on the community.
That's the thing. These will be on the community, and you can go back and refer to these. Maybe some of these will help us in our work, and help us also just think of different things and ways to tell stories and scenarios around policies and procedures. Because sometimes I think it can seem like such a challenge. But if we kind of go through and break it down think about how a policy story is just like any other story. Would anybody like to share their story? I love the earplug story. It's a complete story. It's short and concise. Would anybody like to talk about that? I can just read it, I guess. The boss, the airport worker. So these are the characters. And then the employee shows up without his earplugs. I love this. The boss is mad because this employee has done it before. And of course, he's supposed to have earplugs, I'm sure, working on the airfield. Employee yells something at the boss as he walks away, but he can't hear it because of his earplugs. So that's an interesting scenario. Okay, so thank you so much for contributing to this activity. And I think we will go ahead and move on along, and please feel free to come back to that document on our community at any time and steal each other's ideas or add to your story. And maybe we can just keep building stories there. Thank you so much.
Great. I just want to take you guys to our Google community so that you guys can see some of the resources that are there. Particularly, I want to show you guys some of the resources surrounding scenarios, games, and challenge-based learning, where I think these are 3 great ways that you can use stories as part of your teaching methods, where it actually allows students to become part of the story instead of just absorbers of stories, where they actually take part and they can develop the memories and things like that. So I'm going to bring you to the community, and we have one of our topics within our community is becoming part of the story. And so there's different resources in here that you guys can actually use. And I just want to highlight a couple here. One of my favorites that I came across about a year ago was a game called Dust. And this was developed by a bunch of college students. They were looking for a way to get students more engaged in science. And so they developed this game, and students actually become part of the story, and they developed this great narrative where this mysterious dust falls from the sky and all the adults in the world go unconscious. And it asks the students to role play and go through it, and the students use their science skills to discover what happens. They submit evidence, and they really become part of this big story, which is pretty cool, I think, with that one. And then another great, pretty common activity that you see in schools is the bridge building. I don't know, Bill, maybe you probably do some bridge building with your students or something similar, but it's a pretty common challenge that we give to our students where we say, hey, build a really strong bridge with a bunch of popsicle sticks. And, instead of just giving them that challenge, what if there's a story behind it that motivates them? Well, our old bridge fell down, and we have to build a new bridge for our town. Here's the requirements, who's all involved. And there's actually some websites out there, like if we look, here's one called Building Big, and it's a PBS website that actually has students look at the needs of the town and what they need in terms of their their bridges. And so students are actually building a bridge for a purpose rather than just, can you build a really strong bridge that has no application necessarily to a story. And so the story creates context for these students. The last resource that I want to show you is about scenarios. And this one isn't real pretty to look at, but it's got a great set of information here. What this is it's for people that are going into the field of human resources. And it proposes some different scenarios where students get together and they talk it out. They talk about crazy issues that a human resources person might have to have a conversation with somebody about. You know, here's one. It says, you are an office manager overseeing a department of 25 people. One of your employees comes to you and complains about Pat's unpleasant body odor and how difficult it is to work in the same area. You agree to talk to Pat. Now, that's a difficult conversation to have. But if you can practice that beforehand and actually take part in that narrative and that story beforehand, that could save you some trouble later on. And so you can really use stories and scenarios to give people the practice that they need before they get into the real world. All right, bringing it back to our community. One of the last things that we want you to do today for us is we want to actually come up with some ideas about how you could use stories in your own practice. So I want you to imagine with me. I want you to put yourself into the story. Pretend that you've got a big thing, a big topic to teach tomorrow. I know most of us are probably at the end of our school year or close to the end of it, but just imagine that you're at the end of the year and that you are ready to teach something new. And you want to use stories because you've been to our webinar, you realize that stories are awesome. And so what I'd like you to do is come to this collaborative document that we've got here. It's a Google Doc. It's in our community, and I think it just showed up in the chat. And so if you want to pick a line where it says contributor, if you want to throw in your name, you don't have to throw in your name. We don't have to have that. But just pretend that you're going to use stories in your workplace to teach whatever you need to teach. And come up with some ideas of some absorb, of do, and connect activities. Remember, absorb are those ones where the learner is getting some information, they're taking it in. The do is where they get to practice. The connect is where they get to connect it with other information that they know or their own story or their own life. And go ahead and grab this document and go in and just contribute some ideas. And this resource, will keep this on our community so anybody can come and use it and just see some of the ideas that you have. Because these ideas, who knows, your idea might spark something in me and I can use it tomorrow. and so go ahead and feel free to type in there and come back to it later on. I do see the chat is lighting up, so I'm going to check that real quick as you guys type in there just so I can see what's going on. Oh, good. All right, we got a link there. In the community, you can find all of our resources under webinar resources. We'll keep them in there so that you guys can refer back to them in the future as you're looking for them, or if anybody else that's watching our webinar after it's been recorded, that they can do that as well. And so just grab some space in there and type in some ideas.
Yeah, once again, Ryan, it looks like we're getting a lot of great ideas here.
I love it. I love seeing these documents light up. This is a cool thing that you can definitely use. You know, like we use the storytelling activity. If you want students to build upon their stories or make connections between other people's stories, you could use a Google Doc pretty easily like this. It's great to see all these cool things. I love it.
Yeah. And once again, these will be out on our community for anybody who wants to look at it later on or contribute to it later on.
All right. Just because I know we're kind of getting close to, well, actually, we're kind of over time, and I thank you very much for everybody being here and taking part and sticking with us. The last thing that I want you guys to do is I want you guys to remember back to that story that I told you at the beginning from Made to Stick, that urban legend story. And I want you to remember back to that story and pretend like you're going to tell it to somebody else. Tell it to a friend. Tell it to somebody that you want to warn about travel or something like that. And either in the chat or on the Google community, there's a topic on the Google community. You can see it's kind of right in the middle of my screen. So in the chat or on the Google community, add in a comment, retell that story to a friend. As many details as you can remember. Hopefully it was memorable enough that you still remember some of it. But we just want to see how much this story stuck with you. See if it was sticky enough. And you don't have to go through the whole story, but just give us some of those main details just to see how you did. So either in the chat or in the community, whichever's most convenient for you is fine with us. Yeah, I think probably the most crazy details about the whole thing is waking up in a bathtub full of ice. That would scare me like crazy. But at least you got a drink out of the deal, right? You didn't have to pay for it.
He did get the drink, yeah. It was a costly drink. Yeah, as Linda said, not worth the drink.
All right, as you're finishing up those stories, I just want to leave you with this. And we're just so thankful that you guys attended our webinar. We've enjoyed all of yours as well. We have a survey out there on the Google Plus community, and it's going to be in the chat. If you guys wouldn't mind filling that out, just so that we can get some feedback on how we did today and things that we can improve for the future. We'd really appreciate that from you guys. It's either in the community or in the chat. One of us will get that link in there. We really appreciate you guys sticking with us for as long as you did. We knew it was going to be a little bit long, but we knew we were going to have a lot of fun telling stories today. So we didn't want to cut us short.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for participating so much and really getting into our interactive activities. It's been great to see.
Yes, thank you so much for being such good sports when I put you on the spot there. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, we're still going with the story parts. That's great.
Wonderful.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for attending our webinar.
Hey, David or Darlisa, can you guys get the link in the chat? Did you guys get
that?
I
did put it in there. Let me put it again.
I just, with all the thank yous, I can't see it.
There it is.
Here, I'll say what it is, too. Sorry. Oh.
Uh-oh. We got the wrong survey link in there.
Oh, no.
Let me see.
It's a different survey?
It's the one that allows them to edit it, so.
Oh,
We just need to get back.
Okay. Well, I can send it. Why don't I send it out in email to everybody? I've got everybody. I've got all their names and.
Yeah, we'll send it out. Plus, put the updated one on the community.
Yes.
I think I can get it for you real quick, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Okay.
Try that one.
Thank you, Ryan.
And stay out of the hail. I hear it's hailing out there in Colorado. There it is.
Great. Thank you, Linda.